Our next speaker is my very favorite person, largely because I have learned a lot from his father. His father was a person who nurtured Diabetic Association of India, was a great scientist, a par excellence person, a physician to Prime Minister, and a great teacher, and we have learned a lot. Mandip is a Vice Chair of Clinical Affairs and Professor of Department of Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. He is a Chief of Section of Endocrinology and a Diabetes in Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. He is a reputed clinical and translational researcher in obesity and type 2 diabetes. And he has enormous number of papers, more than 150 research papers, abstracts, and book chapters. And he's a very renowned endocrinologist. And we are going to learn a lot from Mandip. Without interrupting much, I would like to present you Mandip Bajaj, who is a very favorite person of Diabetic Association of India. Not because of his father, but he himself also has contributed a lot to our activities. Over to you, Mandip.
Thank you, Dr. Baroskar. It's a pleasure to be again involved with diabetes education in India. I'm trying to do the screen share here. Okay. Can we? All right. So can everyone see the slides?
No, Mandip, we can't see it. There is a Baylor School of Medicine login that's appearing.
Okay, 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you can see the slides, right?
Yes. You'll have to make it full screen.
There you go. Okay. All right. So, it was almost 25 years ago when I met Dr. Baroskar. We were on a trip to Mauritius, and I was talking on thiazolidinediones in 1996. And everyone looked at me and said, "What is that?" And no one had ever heard of them. And today, almost 25 years later, we heard Dr. Kuzi give an excellent presentation on NASH and how pioglitazone is the metformin for NASH. Certainly, my strong ties to India and the Diabetic Association of India, and it's always a pleasure to participate in activities in India. What I'm going to do today is take you through some of the studies on GLP1 in NASH, and also go through some of our own data, explaining the molecular and metabolic effects of GLP-1s on the liver. I agree with Dr. Kuzi that I'm not going to get into the controversy of calling NAFLD metabolic associated fatty liver disease. That's just terminology. So let me give you a background. Around the time that the first GLP-1 EXENATIDE was approved, we constructed a helper-dependent adenoviral vector with hepatic base expression and secretion of exendin-4 in mice, as you can see here, so that we could get steady state levels of exendin-4 and treat mice for 16 weeks with exendin-4. And so exendin-4 treatment in diet-induced obesity mice, these were mice fed on high-fat diets, resulted in weight loss with increased energy expenditure, reduced free fatty acids, reduced hepatic steatosis, increased adiponectin, and improved glucose homeostasis. And this work was done by Dr. Sampson and Dr. Larry Chan and us in collaboration. Now, at that time, it was not known whether exendin-4 or exenatide could increase adiponectin, but certainly in this study, we did see an increase in adiponectin, and exendin-4 induced secretion of adiponectin was said to be a direct effect promoting adiponectin secretion via the PKA pathway in cultured hepatocytes. So it wasn't just because you lost weight, adiponectin went up, but there was a direct effect of GLP-1 on adiponectin secretion from cultured adipocytes. So having that background, we obviously wanted to look at combining exenatide and pioglitazone therapy in patients with type 2 diabetes. And our hypothesis was that combining pioglitazone with exenatide would be associated with a significant greater reduction in hepatic fat content, as well as a greater increase in plasma adiponectin as compared to pioglitazone alone. My earlier work with Dr. DiFronzo and Dr. Cusi had shown that pioglitazone clearly reduced liver fat and increased adiponectin. So we took 21 patients with type 2 diabetes on a diet, and or metformin, and they received treatment with pio or pio alone or combined therapy with pioglitazone 45 milligrams a day and exenatide 10 micrograms twice daily. At that time, we were very, very I would say strong to give pio 45 a day. These days, we really don't use much of pio 45. All subjects met with a dietitian, advised a weight maintaining diet. And at the end of 12 months, so it was a 1-year study, we measured adiponectin, free fatty acids, lipids, and we did MR spectroscopy for liver fat. And what we did find here, as shown in this slide, is that patients who were on pioglitazone alone, pre and post therapy, the body weight increased, almost a 3 kilo increase as expected with pio. And as Dr. Cusi showed you, you have a redistribution of fat, but at the same time, you have an increase in overall fat mass. BMI went up. Fasting glucose, as expected, came down. Fasting insulin was reduced a little bit. Fasting FFA came down significantly. And lipids remained largely unchanged, other than the fact that triglycerides came down. The liver function parameters, ALT, AST, both came down with pio. But now, when you look at the combined group that got pio and exenatide, there was no significant change in weight. So weight did not change. You prevented the weight gain that you saw with pio. BMI did not change. A1C came down a little more, but clearly with the combined therapy. Fasting glucose came down, fasting insulin came down, free fatty acids came down significantly. Triglycerides came down much more with the combined therapy than with pio alone. A big reduction in triglycerides. And then the ALT came down more with the combined therapy than compared with pio alone. So here's the liver fat data. Liver fat with pio came down about 40% as expected. And the adiponectin increased about 2 to 3-fold with pioglitazone, but with the combined therapy, there was no significant change in weight. Here, you had an increase in weight. No significant change in weight. Hepatic fat came down almost 60%, as shown here. This was a greater reduction in liver fat than pio alone. And plasma adiponectin increased far more significantly with the combined therapy as compared to pio alone, thereby showing you that there was a combined effect that had greater benefits on adiponectin and liver fat and was associated with the amelioration of weight gain that one would see with pio alone. So in conclusion, the study showed that in patients with type 2 diabetes, the addition of PIO and exenatide is associated with a greater reduction in liver fat content, plasma triglycerides, and a greater increase in plasma adiponectin. So obviously the reviewers asked us, why did that happen? And we said it could be the liver fat reduction, maybe more, because of a direct increase in plasma adiponectin, directly enhance hepatic fat oxidation by exenatide, and reduce appetite and body weight, and that the molecular mechanisms need to be studied. Obviously, it took several years for this data to be translated to a large clinical trial in patients with NASH, and two clinical trials. The first one was published recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, placebo-controlled trial of subcutaneous semaglutide in non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Dr. Kuzi was a part of the investigating team. And basically, in this study, they had patients on semaglutide, as you can see here, and placebo. So they basically had patients on semaglutide. Let me just 1 second get this a little, okay. And they had patients on semaglutide 0.1, 0.2, and 0.4 daily, and placebo group, matched for age, body weight, body mass index, type 2 diabetes, A1Cs, liver enzymes, liver fibrosis. As Dr. Kuzi said, most of them were in F2 and F3 fibrosis stage, the majority of the patients, and some in F1. Activity score for NAFLD is pretty matched. And then FibroScan, liver steatosis was matched between groups. Liver stiffness, as assessed by FibroScan, was matched. And enhanced liver fibrosis score, which is based on the serum levels of hyaluronic acid, procollagen type 2, and terminal, and metalloproteinase 1, was pretty matched between groups. So well-matched groups, about 80 patients in each group, that were treated with semaglutide 0.1, 0.2, or 0.4 daily, or placebo for a period of 72 weeks. I think here, 1 second. There we go. Okay, so changes at the end of the study. The primary endpoint, as defined, was resolution of NASH without a progression of fibrosis. And the secondary endpoint here was the improvement in liver fibrosis stage with no worsening of NASH. And the primary endpoint was reached, resolution of NASH with no worsening of fibrosis, semaglutide 0.4, very significant here, p-value less than 0.001 versus placebo. So the primary endpoint was met, but the secondary endpoint, improvement in liver fibrosis stage with no worsening of NASH, as you can see here, 0.4 semaglutide versus placebo was not met, as you can see in this slide. And then when you look at the ALT and AST here, you can see very clearly there was a reduction in the ALT, semaglutide 0.4. It's a dose-dependent effect versus placebo, and ALT, which is right here. And again, the reduction was over a period of 72 weeks in a dose-dependent manner. Now, in terms of adverse effects, nausea was the commonest side effect. Vomiting was seen in about 15% of the patients on semaglutide 0.4 daily. GI side effects largely, and some increase in malignant neoplasms. There were 3 in the semaglutide treated group versus 0 in the placebo group, and largely increase in benign and malignant neoplasms. Again, small numbers, renal cysts went up. Overall, a safe drug. There was no increase in pancreatitis, and amylase and lipase did go up, but certainly no clinical increase in the risk of pancreatitis in the study. The second study, which was published actually 5 years ago in 2016 in the Lancet, liraglutide safety and efficacy in patients with NASH, the LEAN study. Basically, this was again a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled phase 2 trial, liraglutide 1.8 versus placebo for patients who have are overweight, show clinical evidence of NASH, and they were randomly assigned to the 2 study groups. The primary outcome was again resolution of NASH with no worsening of fibrosis over 48 weeks. Again, in this study, you had small number of patients, 26 in lira, 26 placebo. Their match for age, ethnicity, pretty much type 2 diabetes, small number, 9 and 8, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. And again, when you look here, as compared to treatment with lira versus placebo, you saw a greater number of patients with resolution of NASH. That was clearly significant with a p-value of 0.01. But in terms of improvement in fibrosis, you did not see a benefit. Worsening fibrosis came down here, but no improvement in fibrosis. So similar results as the semaglutide study, which was, of course, with a larger number of patients to show you these results. And again, the effects are seen on glucose, on insulin. Insulin levels came down, insulin sensitivity improved, A1C came down, free fatty acids came down. Adipocyte insulin resistance was a little improved, didn't reach significance, but there was weight loss very clearly. BMI came down, and lipids, again, you saw improvement in HDL, as you can see here, and ESDLT came down. So the bottom line is that, again, with liraglutide, you saw improvement in NASH or resolution without improvement in fibrosis. And again, this is just to show you the change in weight and A1C, and you can see here that the non-responders had a lower reduction or less of a reduction in weight compared to the responders at the end of 48 weeks of treatment. And the A1Cs were pretty much similar. So it was independent of glucose control, but really dependent on weight. So when you look at all this, the bottom line you say is, okay, so these drugs, GLP-1 receptor agonists, whether that's liraglutide or exenatide or semaglutide, cause a resolution of NASH, and the mechanisms are probably related to weight loss as being the most important factor, with some improvement in insulin sensitivity and a reduction in lipotoxicity. But the question is, are there GLP-1 receptors on the liver? And there are several studies that show that, yes, they are. Ours seem to suggest that there are no GLP-1 receptors in the liver in isolated hepatocytes, cell lines. So this is an effect independent of the GLP-1 receptor on the liver. And that's important because then that's a direct effect. When we used Exendin 4, cyclic AMP, which is really did not change in the liver in primary hepatocytes, whereas glucagon, as expected, increased cyclic AMP and choline increased. So clearly there is a effect independent of the cyclic AMP pathway, which is the pathway you see in the pancreas, in the liver. So what is this effect? And how does it go about? So one of our hypotheses was that exenatide may be reducing FGF21 resistance in the liver. So, studies came out which showed that patients who are obese and type 2 diabetics and patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease have FGF21 resistance. And so they have higher FGF21 levels, and hepatic FGF21 expression is significantly elevated in obese subjects with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and correlates with an increase in circulating FGF. And plasma FGF levels in obesity and type 2 diabetes correlate with hepatic and peripheral insulin resistance. So we did some studies in mice. We gave them, injected these mice with Exendin 4 versus saline. And these were mice on high-fat diets. And this is your saline group and the Exendin 4, not much of a difference in weight, fat or percentage fat, but glucose metabolism was improved by Exendin 4. And when you look at the liver weight of these mice after treatment, without a difference in body weight and liver fat as a percentage of body fat. So independent of body weight, you saw a clear improvement with Exendin 4, liver triacylglycerol per milligram of liver came down. So there seems to clearly suggest a direct effect. And when we looked at the FGF21 levels, as you can see, high-fat diet, DIO mice, diet-induced obesity, these mice are obese. Clearly, you see an increase in FGF21 or FGF21 resistance, and then you give them Exendin 4 and the FGF21 levels come down. And this FGF21, is important in terms of expression levels. Again, FGF21 in the liver came down with Exendin 4, and liver and plasma correlate. And liver weight and liver FGF21 protein again showed a strong correlation. So by altering or reducing FGF21 expression in the liver with Exendin 4, we found also an increase in AMPK phosphorylation, as shown here. AMPK activity or AMPK phosphorylation in the liver clearly came up, and phospho to total ACC came up. So as Ken talked about, mitochondria and AMPK has a key role in hepatic fat oxidation. It's a key regulator of lipid oxidation in the liver, and clearly treatment with Exendin 4, even independent of weight loss, resulted in a reduction in liver fat, increase in liver AMPK activity, and a reduction in liver FGF21 protein, or amelioration of FGF21 resistance. So AMPK phosphorylation correlated strongly with hepatic FGF21, suggesting that Exendin 4 treatment ameliorated the resistance It was not mediated by differences in circulating adiponectin levels. There were no differences in adiponectin, no differences in weight. Future studies on FGF21 as a potential therapeutic target in the treatment of NAFLD type 2 diabetes, you probably would want to examine the combined effect of exenatide and FGF21 on hepatic fat metabolism. And then we did some more studies, and this is unpublished data in, again, DIO mice, high-fat diets, chow mice, chow diet, and high-fat diet fed and fasting mice and their livers, and again showed similarly AMPK after exendin-4 treatment. This was with the osmotic pump continuous. Clearly, AMPK in the liver is going up. So, AMPK, again, several factors determine AMPK activity, metabolic parameters, weight loss, and others. So we also looked at AMPK in cultured hepatocytes, mouse hepatocytes, and human hepatocytes. This is in vitro studies, again showing you that with exendin-4, AMPK phosphorylation went up in these human hepatocytes and mouse hepatocytes. And then finally, we looked at the liver in terms of inflammation. So AMPK activation is also associated with the amelioration of inflammation. NF-kappa B activation comes down, TLR4 comes down, and SOX3 came down in these animal studies. And these are all important pathways in causing hepatic inflammation, which is a key component of NASH. So on one side, you see an increase in AMPK phosphorylation, and on the other hand, you see a reduction in the key inflammatory pathways in the liver, as shown here. And again, our effects were independent of the GLP-1 receptor. We do not think that there is a GLP-1 receptor on the liver. So I'll stop here. I want to thank the whole team in our that participated in these studies: Padma, Dr. Sampson, who's now at Florida, Dr. Jogi, Dr. Mutupillai, who did our liver fat estimations, Dr. Lawrence Chan, and also the research support, American Diabetes Association, Amylin Pharmaceuticals, that funded some of these studies, and the National Institute of Health, Diabetes Endocrinology Research Center at Baylor that supported this work. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to you. The bottom line is we are probably in the direction of treating NASH with GLP-1 receptor agonists. We've seen the effects of pioglitazone, but unfortunately, till today, there's not a single study looking at combined pioglitazone with GLP-1 receptor agonists in NASH. I think that's a study we very much need, because on our clinical front, we are treating patients with NASH with semaglutide and combining it with a low dose of pioglitazone, 15 milligrams, in patients with type 2 diabetes with NASH. So I think that study is very much needed, and that the effects of GLP-1 receptor agonists, while weight loss plays a key role, may also be due to direct effects of GLP-1 on the liver and the direct effects of GLP-1 in ameliorating liver inflammation and activating AMPK and mitochondrial function. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bajaj. Dr. Om is just logging in. Till then, Dr. Meeta, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, sure. Dr. Bajaj, I would like to know the status of any other new drugs in the offing for NASH, and what happened to obeticholic acid? Is it still in the running?
Yeah, though obeticholic acid is still being examined in the running, I personally think, that one must look at FGF21. That is, as our studies show, maybe another important drug in the treatment of NASH. There are some FGF21 studies going on in NASH. The data is still too early. And again, this is not a approved treatment. They're still at phase 2 to phase 3, but certainly, and then combining it with GLP1s, as I showed you, I think, combining either FGF21, with exenatide, as we showed you, or semaglutide, which is what is used now, and combining a pioglitazone low dose with semaglutide is really, those studies need to be done. Of course, we are using a lot of low dose pioglitazone, 15 milligrams in NASH patients with semaglutide.